Oh, sorry. Hold on, Phil. Just a sec. Um, do I introduce myself first, and then I do the advice, and then you come in? Is that right?
That's right. That's
Okay.
right. But we are, funny enough, I click live. So we're live. So that's
Oh,
okay.
okay.
So live is live, and that's fun. That's one of the joys of it. So with that, Joseph, I'm going to turn it over to you to start the show.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm Joseph O'Connor. Very pleased to be here, and I'm an executive coach. I'm a coach trainer, and I'm also an author of a number of books on NLP, neuro linguistic programming, coaching, neuroscience, and just starting at the moment on a slightly different sort of book on science fiction, which I've always wanted to write. Yeah, and I'm delighted to be here and to talk about NLP and writing and whatever else might come up that's interesting.
Awesome. Give me the advice. What's your
Oh,
best advice, Joseph?
okay. Best advice: if you want to understand, act.
Act. Wow. Okay. That seems simple. So, what did you learn that? Is that your advice, or did you get that from somebody in your career?
I never really, I never really got it from anyone that I remember, but when you're interested in a lot of things, you can read about them, you can talk about them with other people, you can get to know them, but that's always at one remove. When you actually start doing it, then it's quite different. I mean, I had a career as a guitarist, professional classical guitarist. So you can learn the guitar and know all about it, and you can wonder what it's like to actually play professionally in front of a large group of people. But when you're actually there, nothing prepares you for that. And so the real visceral, emotional being there, embodied, really tells you something about it. And after that, it's never the same. And that's been true for me performing, it's been true teaching, it's been through writing. However much you know about writing something, when you actually get down to it, it's never the same. It's like having a map of a country. But when you actually get into the country, it's like, oh, they never told me about these forests and these thickets and this long grass and these predators. Whoops.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So yet I think I don't know. I mean, some preparation though is necessary, right? I mean, we can't just go out and do it. So where do we find that balance, Joseph, between doing and preparing?
I think, yeah, you need to prepare to some extent. Mental rehearsal will help you up to a point, but only up to a point because when you're mentally rehearsing, there's no outside feedback. It's all happening in your brain. Therefore, you can never surprise yourself. That's why it's up to a point. It's useful. So yeah, you basically you do what you can, and when you can say, again, this is what I think. When you can say to yourself, "I deserve to succeed at this. I've done everything I can. I deserve to succeed." Then you're ready to go out and actually try.
That's a good that's a good milestone, I think. If we actually believe that we're ready to succeed, if we feel ready, chances are we probably are ready, right? So that's
Yeah, I think so. And there's that, well, what else can I do? I actually want to get on with this and actually do it. Yeah.
so why don't we though? What holds us back from moving from the knowing to the doing? There's got to be a gap there, right? Because a lot of people, they say they want to write a book, and they might practice and they might read about it, right? They might have read your work or somebody else's work, but why don't we get started? Why don't we do it?
Well, I think there's a number of reasons. Of course, there's always the time thing. But if you put something off until you have time, the odds are you'll never get round to it. So it's always about priorities. Once you shift your priorities and your time, so that's one thing. And there's real things, real constraints there. But at the same time, once you decide what's a priority for you, it's really quite easy. The things that you thought were more important, they suddenly aren't. You can suddenly get on with it. But then the other thing I think about writing particularly is that when you've got an idea, or maybe anything, you've got this idea, and while you've got it, it's perfect. It's like it's never been tested. It's like the white paper, it's completely white. There's nothing there. And then, you know, you start typing once upon a time or whatever it is, and immediately it's no longer perfect. Immediately there's something there. And from that point onwards, you can't kid yourself that it's going to be absolutely fantastically perfect. You have to make something, you have to actually create something that is not going to be what you thought it was, but it's going to be dynamic and creative and hopefully better.
Interesting. So many of us, myself included, right? I want to write the perfect book, the book that's gonna, sell 1 million copies, that's gonna change the world with my brilliance. And yet, you just said it's never gonna be perfect. So that sounds to me, maybe I'm just myself here, that I'm struggling because I haven't made peace with the imperfect. Does that happen? I mean, as you coach, or is there more maybe there that we need to unpack?
I think that's right to an extent. You've got to make it's never going to be perfect as it kind of exists in your head. So again, you just got to do it. You just got to act. You just got to jump in there. There's the saying that when you're writing a book, or maybe you're doing anything creative like this, you've got to jump off the cliff, and then you construct your parachute on the way down. All right. But if you wait to jump off the cliff, do I have my parachute? Is it going to be okay? Maybe it'll go wrong. I don't know. It's always safest not to. Maybe there's a path down here that I can, you just got to go, okay, now let's do it.
Good. Okay. So, all right. So we do it. So we've got started. We do it. What's as we think about this, how do we make sure that we finish it and not just start it? Because you've finished
Yeah.
what, 17 books, right? You're an author of at least
a bit more than that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think 19 at the last count.
19. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, well, you in a sense, you start. How you start is going to some extent determine how you finish, because if you've got to have some kind of structure, you've got to have some kind of idea of what's happening, and then as you write, it's going to be a kind of mixture between the structure that keeps you within bounds and gives you some confidence about what's going on, and at the same time, it's got to be wide enough to give you that chance to actually move around. I don't know if you've seen the film Scent of a Woman with Al Pacino.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Scent of a
Yeah.
Woman. Great. Yeah. Chris O'Donnell, Al Pacino. Absolutely.
There's that wonderful scene, the tango scene, and Al Pacino plays a blind man, and he's offered to teach this very beautiful lady to actually dance tango, and everybody's going, just but you're blind, and he asks his friend first of all, give me the measurements of the dance floor. So the guy tells him roughly how it measures where the band is. And with that, he knows the bounds in which he can move freely. If he didn't know that, he'd be always worried, am I going to trip off the edge? I don't know where the edge is. But if you know where the edge is, then you can be very, very free within that structure. So you've got to get that balance between having a structure and then being able to play in it, dance within it. And I like that metaphor because it tells you something.
Yeah, well, that makes so much sense, that's probably why most most traditional publishers, they want your outline first, and they want to see you can write your first chapter or so first, and of course how you're going to sell the book as well. So that I've not heard that metaphor before for writing, but it makes a lot of sense for me to do that, right? To have those constraints and yet those freedoms to do that. So what? Okay, so we finished, we started, we ended. So now the middle part, right? So talk, because right, it's the messy middle. I mean, now that we know how to begin and end, well, okay, now we've got that. So how do we keep the momentum going? I know that you coach some of this, and you've done obviously a lot of this. So how do we keep the momentum flowing, Joseph?
Yeah, it's so funny, isn't it? You say, I got an idea for a book, and then I finished it, and then I got it published. And there's, a couple of sentences there, but in between, there's months of blood, sweat, and tears, all compressed into one sentence. Yeah, I wrote a book. I think that you've got to. There's a big difference between writing and editing. So you set yourself down. Some people are very disciplined. They'll write for an hour or 2 hours a day in a particular time, and that's great. I'm not one of those people. But you write, and then you put it aside, and then you edit. You don't try and edit as you go along, because if you go and try to edit as you go along, you'll stop the flow. It's a completely different process. One is very proactive, flowing, creative. The other is, how can I, not exactly what's wrong with this, but how can I make it better? I'm kind of picking out the small bits of it, whereas in the first part you're letting the big idea flow. So then you write, you edit, you write, you edit, you write, you edit, and it amuses me in many ways, because people talk about writer's block, and what I find amusing about that is that writers have their very own sort of block. You don't hear about policeman's block or manager's block, or a manager wouldn't phone in and say, well, look, I don't really feel very creative this morning. I don't think I'll come in and do my job. Is that all right? but as a writer, because you don't have anyone to report to, I don't feel very creative. I don't think I'll write today. And again, this thing about it's not that you feel creative and then write. It's you write, you jump in, and then you get creative. It's that way round. So you've got to just jump in, however painful it might feel, and thinking, I've got nothing to say today. It's really difficult. You just got to jump in and do it, and then keep doing it until you're done.
That seems so simple, and yet, again, right, I can only speak for me when I say that I get that block. I did a lot of video, but I didn't write much for a couple of years, and I'm back writing now, making sure that I make time. But I think you're absolutely right. What I don't know where that was, but it said like a writer writes always, and it's so interesting that you kind of echo that, because it's a job, right? This is something, if you want it to be, it is actually a job. So how do we, how do we get more creative though? Or is it just as simple as just writing and it comes out of us? What have you found, Joseph?
It's not so simple. And of course, everybody gets blocked, everybody goes through that. So it's normal. Some people feel, everybody else seems to be writing so easily, and I'm not. Everybody does that, from the greatest writers. I'm sure, Shakespeare and Hemingway had their days when they just, I don't want to write this anymore. I'm no good. So you've got to get through that. One very good way to get through that, actually, is to say, I'm going to write 5 minutes every day. Just 5 minutes. Actually, you don't even have to write. What you have to do is to sit down in front of the computer, whatever it is, and be willing to write if something comes up. 5 minutes a day is, it's not going to kill anyone. And if you commit to that for a month or so, it's amazing what happens, because you start with 5 minutes, maybe you hardly have anything, but that's it, 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, you put it away. And then the next day you start writing, and then you, oh my God, I've written for 10 minutes. I better stop. Well, maybe I'll just finish this little bit. And so it's by limiting yourself, by putting constraints on yourself, you feel you want to burst through them, and that helps. And at the same time, you have a bad day, you go watch the screen for 5 minutes and go, okay, I've done it, and that's all right.
Wow. Yeah. That's super doable, right? Sitting there, committing to being willing to write for 5 minutes that's super doable, and that's good. I'm keeping that as a note for me of things to do when I feel plugged up, right? So that's interesting. So we talked about guitar, we talked about writing. How does NLP fit into your life here, Joseph? Where did that come from? Is that because of guitar? You had NLP to your music, or how does that work?
Well, originally, actually, yes. I was a professional guitarist, and I was, performance and also teaching. And I used to go to a lot of seminars around psychology of learning, because that was always interesting to me. And one of them was about NLP, neuro linguistic programming. At the time, there wasn't very much literature about it. And I got quite interested. It sounded very interesting because it was about communication, it was about language, it was about finding out how people who are very good at something actually thought about it and then being able to somehow adapt that for yourself. And that was actually my first book. I was writing a book on learning and teaching music called Not Pulling Strings, learning and teaching guitar. And I had a whole load of psychological approaches ready there. And in the end, NLP kind of took it over. And what was going to be one chapter became the whole book. And that was very interesting. So that was the first book. It was called Not Pulling Strings, about learning and teaching the guitar with NLP. And it was one of the first books that was written outside America, actually, on NLP. And I believe probably the only one that's on NLP and music still, because they're both pretty distinctive disciplines.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then I did, I got training, went to get some training and got to know more about it and thought, hey, this is interesting stuff. And I started to write more on it. And that's what I like to do. When something's interesting, I like to write about it and learn about it in that way. And hopefully by learning about it and going through the hard spade work of that, I can help to iron it out for the reader so that they don't have to do so much hard work to understand it.
Yeah, well, that's interesting that you write about what you want to know as opposed to just what you know. And do the research, right, and find all of that. That's a very a more academic maybe model of writing, which is super interesting to me. I like that because right, the research part is something that a lot of nonfiction folks don't do. They speak from experience or they speak from research. They don't typically do both. It sounds to me like you're doing both. So help us, for those of us that are like, okay, neurolinguistic programming is, give me, what's a definition and how might we apply that?
Oh, there's all sorts of definitions. It's officially, it's the study of the structure of subjective experience. So we all have our subjective experience and it's very much ours. At the same time, it's not random at all. So it has a structure. So basically, it's how you can understand that, particularly in terms of when you do something really brilliant and you think, hey, that was really good. I wonder if I could do that again. So then you find out how you did that, because it has a structure. And then by understanding that, by the way that you were thinking and acting and communicating at the time, then you can do it again. And equally, in the same way, you make something really stupid, you really screw something up, you go equally, how on earth did I manage to do that? That was really stupid. I've really got to find out how I managed to fall in that hole, make sure I don't fall in it again. So NLP is very much about curiosity about how other people do things. And yourself, how you do things, both really good things and really stupid things, because if you can understand them, then, well, you can learn. You learn from your good and your bad experiences. So that's pretty much what NLP is. There's a lot of other stuff too, but I think it comes from that curiosity about what's going on here. What's happening in the brain? What's happening in other people's brains? How do some people manage to be so good at something and other people not so good, but maybe good at other things?
So how do we cultivate that curiosity then? I mean, because you talk, certainly there's curiosity in writing, there's curiosity in music, and now you're talking about the curiosity of language and NLP. How do we cultivate that, or how do you cultivate that curiosity? How do you coach that?
It's a very good question. For me, I'm always looking for what's missing. And I think that's important in coaching as well. When you're listening to someone, of course, you're listening to the foreground of what they're saying. But equally, I think you need to listen to the background out of what it comes from. So what they're not saying, what's being missed out. It's like music, there's the notes, but there's a space between the notes. And those spaces between the notes actually give meaning to the notes. So, what's missing? And I've always been interested in what, what's missing from this? What isn't there? What do I want to find out? Because there's just so much. And well, there's a nice story actually that comes in NLP. I think I heard originally about Milton Erickson, who was a hypnotherapist. And one of his clients apparently was someone who was completely bored with life. He thought everything was totally boring. He just couldn't see the point of anything. Everything was the same. So Erickson said to him, okay, well, look, I've got a challenge for you. Go out to my lawn outside there, my grass lawn there, and I want you to bring back 2 blades of grass that are absolutely identical. So the guy goes out. And well, as you can imagine, a couple of hours later, he comes back and says, I couldn't find any. And he got the point. It doesn't matter how trivial or how small something is, it's unique. You can't duplicate it. So you start looking for things that are exactly the same. And you start to notice these subtle little differences that you never saw before, because you've got these glasses on, you assume that everything's the same, everything's boring. You don't look, take the glasses off, everything's different. So and I think that's one way to cultivate, really, is to just be interested in what the world is going to throw at you, because it will always throw something really interesting at you if you just open yourself to it.
That's yeah. So let's take off the glasses here. Let's talk about science fiction, right? Because I think that's interesting. That's because I really believe that's a great jump point here. Because to be interested in something kind of feels like very unrelated to music and writing and NLP and any of that, but now science fiction. So I was a big Asimov fan growing up, big Isaac Asimov fan. Ray Bradbury, lots of those folks. So science fiction. So who's influenced your thinking on that? Who's made you more curious about that, Joseph? Or did you just pick that up for yourself?
No, I always loved science fiction. Tolkien isn't science fiction, but I was reading Tolkien in my early teens. The kind of fantasy world, that sort of thing. So I was always interested in that. I really like the writer Dan Simmons. If you haven't come across Dan Simmons, he's a wonderful sci-fi writer. The what's it called? The Hyperion Saga. But anyway, it's that's been an interest of mine for a long time, and I've read a lot of it, and I find it fascinating. It's the what if question. What if? What if that was true? What if the world was like this? And for many years, I promised myself, when I have time, I will write a science fiction book. Well, a couple of months ago, I decided I'm going to make time, otherwise it's not going to happen. So there we go.
Wow. So you made time for that. How much different is science fiction than nonfiction for writing, from a process standpoint? Obviously the words are different and stuff, but I mean, how different is that from a process perspective?
Well, I don't think it's very different. From a process perspective, it's hardly different at all. Different content, of course. Fiction, you're making up characters that don't exist in settings that don't exist, and it's all in your imagination. With nonfiction, what you're doing is you're still telling a story. You're still trying to engage the reader in some way. You're still trying to make it interesting for them. You're still trying to get them in their imagination to see and hear and feel things. It's just different, that's all. So I think it's really important, and as a non-fiction writer, non-fiction should not be boring. Non-fiction should be creative and as interesting as fiction, really. Just because it's non-fiction doesn't make it boring. So I think it's very important for non-fiction writers to engage all the tools that are normally taught to fiction writers about, how to think, how to write clearly, how to structure things so that the words and ideas come alive for the reader to think into the reader's mind. In order to tell your story, because fiction or non-fiction, you're telling a story, and if it resonates with the reader, then they're going to do something about it.
Interesting. So, so that's so have you written music too? Or do
Yeah.
you just play? Yeah.
No, I've written music as well. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Very similar type process there, right? We're telling a story, following that through, or is that totally different too?
It's different. It's it's still a creative process, and you've still got something at the end of it like that that's aesthetic and beautiful. But with literature, you've got words, so that the understanding is communicated through the words, and that's that's pretty clear. We all speak, we all understand language. When you're doing music, you're still communicating something. You're still trying to make some kind of um, create some kind of emotional, aesthetic experience for the listener. But the tools that you use are quite different, and I don't find that easy to explain.
That's okay. So that's it. But that's interesting, right? I bet. So tell me about, as we kind of move here towards the end here, talk to me about how that, because I bet that all plays into the way you coach, right? The way that you work with people and how that happens. So tell me a little bit about your coaching practice and your process.
Well, I love to coach executives, and executives, they have a lot of difficult decisions to make. They have a lot of responsibility, and the being able to simply reflect, with some space to reflect, with somebody who listens and can ask questions, is very, very valuable. And it's really interesting talking with people like that. They have such interesting ideas, and my job as a coach is to listen, and not to give advice in any way, but to ask questions in order to help that person understand better where the gaps in their thinking are, so that they can do something about it. And the old saying of coaching is that the problem isn't the problem is the way that you're thinking about the problem. And of course, bearing in mind there are certain situations that are very difficult to deal with, quite objectively. There's still this idea that what's a really difficult situation for one person, another person will just breeze through. So how are they thinking differently about that? And then that really releases a lot of things. So maybe we're back to the gaps, to be able to ask questions like a searchlight. The question's a bit like a light, you're kind of shining either a laser beam focused or a big spotlight at what the person says and their experience, to light it up in a way that they haven't seen it yet, because people look for solutions in things that they know. Of course they do. And you don't know what you don't know. So it needs somebody else outside to go, well, have you looked there? But I don't know that. Well, let's take a look together. And I think that's what I do, and I think that's what coaches do, and it's really interesting work.
Yeah. Wow. Well, it sure seems that way. It seems like there's a lot of interest there and a lot of similarities, but even between music and coaching, looking for the space between the note that wasn't played,
Yes.
right, or in writing, right, the thing that wasn't said, or the part of the story that we have to, embellish ourselves. So that's awesome. So Joseph, if there's anything that you'd like to share that maybe can help give people some hope or some encouragement if they're on the writing journey, whether it's a fiction book or a nonfiction book, whether it's a song or whether, it's just writing a letter to a loved one, what would that be?
Oh, stay with it. Absolutely, stay with it. Um, you, everyone has a unique take on the world, and there's no other take like your own personal take on the world. It's unique to you, and you'll create something that cannot be created by anybody else. And if you just give yourself a chance, and if it's important enough to you that you want to do that, just keep on doing it. Just keep on going. And it will come through. It's almost a kind, you can't help yourself. It will come through, in the end, and you'll be glad it did.
Awesome. Awesome. So stay the course, and if you're stuck, commit to being willing to write for 5 minutes a day. Sit down and then just do it. Joseph talks about jumping off the cliff, constructing that parachute on the way down, and encourages us all with his work and his music and all that you do. Joseph, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. If folks want to get more connected, where would you like him to go if they want to talk to you more?
Oh, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. Joseph O'Connor. So easy to find. Yeah, that's good to talk more. I'd be delighted to hear from people.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Joseph, for sharing some of your brilliance today and for making music out of your words today. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Phil. Been a pleasure.